these are my friends. Come along with me, see how the story ends.
Welcome back to another episode of Professional Hippies. How you guys been out there? We missed you. We love you. Dylan and I are back from our vacation, but we're not taking a break and bringing you guys the very best. Today we have Peter, and Peter, we're really excited to have you on. We had to make the stars align. You're going to learn a lot about Peter in this episode, but he's the owner of Gwella, as well as, a serial entrepreneur. When I started taking a look in your past, it's no wonder why you're successful and heading off into this venture. So if learning about a walk in psychedelics and business and entrepreneurship is something that is appealing to you, you know that every week we strive to bring you guys the very best we can and mind-altering information, content, and people that will serve you on your journey. Without further ado, let me give you a proper introduction to who our star guest is today. Peter is an award-winning entrepreneur and CEO of Gwella, as well as a brand house and life sciences company on a mission to make psychedelics more accessible and help people use them safely and effectively. Okay, we all like that. So he's an active participant and early mover in emerging and highly regulated industries, including both cannabis and psychedelics, stemming from his early personal experiences with entheogens. Try and say that 10 times fast. He's become a passionate advocate for cognitive liberty and the right of every human to experiment with their own conscience, something that I think we all stand and die on that hill. He's recently launched Mojo in the USA. You guys are going to have an opportunity to find out more about that. Definitely recommend you check it out. It's an innovative patent-pending product that mimics the benefit of microdosing in a completely legal form. Peter, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And so I think there's a lot of threads that we could pull out here, a lot of places we could start. But for us, I think the main interest is figuring out, like, hey, how did you find yourself at the intersection of wanting to do something where it seems like you're dancing on a line of legality, kind of passion, where it's a thing that some people are excited about, but kind of trepid on approaching into. So how did you find yourself at an intersection of, yeah, this is the space that I want to move into? Because you've had some experience in businesses before, right? Why not go more a traditional route?
Yeah, I really feel like I'm reintegrating past loves into my life over the last few years. I first encountered psychedelics when I was 16, growing up in the UK. For a brief window of time, you could go into a store and buy magic mushrooms, and me and my friends often did and had wonderful / terrifying experiences in the forest, completely non-integrated, non-prepared experiences. But it set me on a journey of fascination with plants and what they can do and these kind of interesting botanicals. I became obsessed with sites like Erowid. I don't know whether you guys have been on that, but it's a big drug database basically where people write self-reports. It has all of the kind of biochemistry and, all of the history. And so I would look up different chemicals and botanicals and then be like, okay, Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds. I'm going to set this Friday out and take a bunch of these with my friends. Okay, this chemical, I'd just be fascinated with this stuff because of what it did the first time. I just had no idea you could experience these levels of what I now would call consciousness, but at the time, just like wild experiences. And then I started to grow up in my 20s, got into business and things like that, and largely left psychedelics. And plants and plant medicines have always been there in the background, but I would say my 20s was largely bereft of that. It was me just trying to build a business career and things like that. I moved to Canada when I was 30 and built a couple of advertising agencies. And then when cannabis started to become legal here, I started to do a lot of work with cannabis brands, a lot of the big kind of licensed producers, helping them build out brands. And I was like, this is really fun. I used to smoke cannabis. This is dope. Reintegrating this stuff too. And got quite good at advertising and building brands in heavily regulated spaces, because there's a lot of things you can't do. You can't advertise in Facebook in the same way that you would for a normal CPG product. And started helping those brands, started building our own brands. We built a company called High Noon that we later sold. And then when that sale went through, I knew I wanted to do something else in these emerging, interesting markets. I knew I wanted to do something else in plant wellness type stuff that I'm become really interested in again. Mushrooms have always been really interesting to me. I grow them in my garden. So I'm like, I really want to integrate this and do something in this space. And it just happened that at the time, there was a lot of kind of buzz starting to happen. There was the psychedelic renaissance started to bubble up. Regulations started to loosen. The public companies started to pop up and created this kind of hype cycle. So there was capital moving into the space. And so this was really beginning of 2020, just pre-COVID. I was like, okay, I'm going to come up with a name. I'm going to come up with a concept. We're going to launch a company in this space. And then COVID happened and I ended up building during the pandemic. But the whole idea with Gwella came from me looking around and looking what other people were doing in the psychedelics world. And it was largely drug development or clinics underneath this kind of medicalized approach, i.e. we're going to take these substances, we're going to apply them to clinical conditions and see how we can help sick people get better. And whilst I think that's incredible and we're going to see a lot of great new medicine for people that are really suffering, my fundamental belief was there's a lot more to these substances than simply fixing sick people. That's not been my experience with them. I don't think that's most people's experiences with them. And historically, they haven't always been used in that way. From Eleusis to the hippie movement, people have used them for spiritual, consciousness-raising, creativity-inducing type experiences. And so I wanted Gwella to be a company that helped destigmatize and normalize these substances from a betterment of the well standpoint. So people that are getting on with life, they're not necessarily severely sick, but they want to use these substances to improve their life, whether it's to have an incredible experience with their partner, with an incredible experience at a music festival, or just having an experience in the woods with their friends like me. And so Gwella's mission really started to form around what we call the +6 rather than the -6, helping people get from baseline to a +6 rather than a -6 to a baseline. And at the start, that was pretty unique. There weren't that many companies talking about that stuff. And there's obvious reasons why. The path to market was a lot more clear for people trying to get FDA-regulated drugs through. You start with saying these things can be useful medicine, and then eventually you get to the point where there's broader access. I just wanted to leapfrog and go straight to this kind of endpoint and start helping people in the now. And frankly, I saw a lot of issues with the biotechnology route as well. There was an obsession with creating second and third generation psychedelics because it was patentable and you could build IP around it. Whereas in my mind, there's plenty of great first generation psychedelic substances out there. And actually what we really need is access to these substances in a legal framework and education around how to better use them. Like I said, started it in 2020, and 3 years in now, we've launched a product called Mojo, which you mentioned at the top, that's like a psychedelic mimicking gummy. And then we have a bunch of kind of education tools. We have a strain library, a retreat directory. We have content around the different substances that you can try and how to use them more effectively and safely. I'm loving the work. I'm loving working in something that I was so passionate about in my teens and bringing this back to the fore of my life now.
Man, there's so much to unpack there. There's so much richness. And I love that, hearing a journey where it seems like potentially you just got into something for the sake of, hey, I need to build my career. I need to do the thing that we're all taught to do, right? I need to grow up. I need to mature, or et cetera. And you built this portfolio of skills. And once you had summited a certain mountain or a place where you're like, hey, there's an opportunity to exit on this interstate and potentially take a route that others wouldn't potentially entertain. It seems like there's a lot of other things. Like what I'm pulling from is one of the other interviews I'd seen you do. You mentioned taking more of a scenic approach to skill sets, right? Like entertaining a diverse group of skills so that you're not one dimensional, and that broadening what you're entertaining by having great friendships, having great relationships, taking care of yourself personally, that has a direct impact in what you're doing career-wise. And so I'm seeing this aliveness come out of you when you're describing what you're doing day to day. So what's it like when you pivot from something where you're in more of a traditional path to where you're at now, where I know this personally, there's not exactly like a guidebook. It sounds like you have a lot of reference points, but what are some of the hurdles you're encountering now where it's in like a space that's looking to become regulated? There's just unforeseen challenges like with any business, but what's it like when you're kind of like figuring this out on the fly? Okay, what's cool, what's not cool? Where am I putting my business too exposed? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can't remember who tweeted it the other day, but it was basically something like we spend our childhood and our teens like building up this personality, and in our 20s we reject it, and then if we're lucky we can rebuild some of these passion points and rediscover like these childhood wonders. And I feel like I'm kind of trying to be in that zone. I don't want to be like melodramatic, but that Tom York Radiohead song where for a minute there I lost myself. Not that the 20s were bad or anything like that. I had a great time in my 20s, but it's just like you're really trying to find yourself in the world. You're this new like adult and you're grasping at things and rejecting things and all of that. You're trying to be this sensible person and all of that, and then you get to a point, or I got to a point where I wanted to rediscover some of that, or I wanted to have this kind of more whole me and pull down on these things that I used to be interested in. But to your question about, emerging spaces and regulations and laws and things like that, we always knew we know that there's just from a purely economic standpoint, we know that there's a huge market here in psychedelics. A lot of people use these substances. There's an enormous amount of demand for these substances and for ancillary or adjacent products around it to help people use these things. And you only have to, people look at the kind of market research when they're putting decks together for the biotech companies. The psychedelic therapy market is going to be 10 billion by this with this CAGR and all of that type of stuff. And it's highly speculative, but still interesting. But you can get a real sense for the quote unquote adult use market by just talking with grey market suppliers and having a look at how big these grey market suppliers are. I had a conversation with one last year on our podcast, and he was doing close to $1 million a month. So this is like a $12 million business, just one grey market supplier that does chocolates, mushrooms, all of that kind of stuff. High quality, great stuff, but these are legit businesses. And in Canada, there's hundreds of these. So there's real demand there and there's real interest. And so that was really the kind of some of the things we thought about, like, can we plot a business knowing that there's going to be regulatory change, but maybe there isn't right now? And so that's where the idea of building a product that mimics a microdose, how can people get the same effects without necessarily using the substances that are illegal? And people can get the substances that are illegal, but let's say people don't want to, or they're traveling with these things or whatever it is. So we wanted to build a product that had real effects, that had real outcomes, very close that you would experience if you're microdosing. And my co-founder, Daniel, he's a massive science nerd, biotechnology, biochemistry, geneticist. He created a product for himself in university that essentially he wanted to remove Adderall from his life, but still wanted a study aid. And so the first iteration of Mojo was his study aid, essentially. He built this product to help him study, stay up, get energy. And when he bought the formula into Guella, it was like rocket fuel to start with. It was super intense, not really fully marketable in the consumer market. And so we spent a year testing it, giving it out, eating it ourselves, dog fooding it, all of that kind of stuff that a consumer company would do. We sold a bunch of gummies, like the first iterations, the second iterations, and just started testing and learning, seeing what people liked. We dialed in the formulation. We got it to a much more kind of mellow version that still has the same effects. We got it much more, to start with, it was disgusting. It was really bitter tasting because it has different bioactives in there. And we had to really work on the flavor, and now it's really tasty. We got rid of a lot of the artificial stuff, a lot of the sugar. We made it vegan, all of that type of stuff. We had to spend a year in R&D doing, and then we launched it last year with one strength. And then in the course of the year, we also launched extra strength and then 2 new flavors. And then we also, for Valentine's Day, we launched a libido variation with a few other kind of botanicals in there, like canna, and cordyceps already helps with that and things like that. You know, that product is not dependent on regulatory change. It's fully legal. We can sell it everywhere. In the US, it's very easy for us to sell. Canada, we've got our NPN number. The UK is a bit weird about nootropics. Ultimately, we can sell it and do sell it globally. But long term, we do want to be selling our microdose stacks that we know we have. We've thought about what are the anti-nausea components, how do we have a good takeoff, what are some of the supplements you can take in and around this to help have a better landing if it's a big trip, or just mellow things out with a microdose. And we have a bunch of ideas like that, but in the meantime, the business isn't dependent on regulatory change, but we will keep pushing and advocating for that regulatory change. And then on the Guella site, which is guellamushrooms.com, we just have a whole host of content, education, tools that people who are using whatever substance can go there and get guidance. The whole idea with Guella is somewhere in between sitting in a doctor's chair and having this kind of very therapeutic clinical treatment, and then on the other end, rolling the dice with your buddies in the forest like I did when I was younger, that sometimes went well, sometimes went terrifyingly. Somewhere there's a middle ground, and that's where Guella really wants to play, is this kind of responsible use for people where there are some guardrails. These are powerful substances. We do need to think about how we use them if you want to get the most out of them. But that doesn't mean you have to lock them up behind a doctor's office and patent them so it's only physicians that can prescribe them under certain conditions. We think that's bullshit.
Yeah, I'll second that bullshit. That's something that I loved seeing, just the content you guys are putting out there is, okay, it doesn't, and in this conversation, it doesn't always have to be like, I'm broken, fix me. And I think a lot of times when people approach some of these alternative therapies with that mentality, you might not even find what you're looking for. It's not a magic pill in the first place. It's just another tool in the toolkit, so to speak. But also the mass swath of those that are looking for just... Sorry, go on. You're good. Don't lose that thought. Chase that rabbit.
No, I was going to say, you also need to... I think we also need to be careful not to pathologize them. We obviously don't want only people that are sick to have to be able to get access to these things, because they can do a lot more. And you'll end up in a kind of the ludicrous situation that we had in Canada, where you had to get a prescription for a cannabis script. And so people be like, oh yeah, I've hurt my back, or yeah, I've got this terrible anxiety, or yeah, my tooth hurts, and you had to play this game to get a prescription. But also, I don't like the idea of just thinking that these things are a medicine, frankly. I think just coming at this from a framework of sickness and fixing is unhealthy for us. And I even think there's sometimes a conversation around, even with people that are into psychedelics and advocates, they're obsessed with this idea of making them so serious and so framing them in this medicalized language, whereas it's also perfectly fine just to have an enjoyable time, have fun, get the giggles. I know there's plenty of people that do the California sober, a little bit more than a microdose, maybe half a gram or something like that on a Friday night instead of drinking. It's a lot less toxic, it's fun. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to sacredize everything all the time and kind of frame them in this kind of medicalized way. Levity is a medicine as well, I think. Levity is good for the soul and just having fun. But again, that's with the caveat that these are powerful substances. People need to be careful, but the last thing we want, I think, is to come at this just from a fixing sick people perspective.
When you're coming from that too, and that's how it's being pushed right now, right? Where people are trying to use it to get it past. Like, that's kind of what happened with cannabis, right? Mm-hmm. We needed to get it approved and get the script, and now we do pass the law, and you're trying to jump that rail, right? Let's just get past it. It's going to get to this point anyways.
Yeah.
When you're doing this, I'm curious, because you are doing that, right? Are you getting a lot of pushback from people, either from the medical industry or from people that want to get it to where you're at, but are like, no, we need to go through these steps in order to get it there?
There is definitely a feeling, and sometimes valid, kind of pushback, certainly in the psychedelics community, is, whoa, slow down. We don't want the 60s again, where theories threatening to put supposedly acid in the water and let's get as many people high as possible, as quickly as possible. I also just ultimately think people are using these substances, whether they're legal or not. They're out there, they're easy to get. better to have a framework, better to have education, better to have quote unquote harm reduction. So I think the horse has already left the barn for these people. And I think there definitely is like a business standpoint as well for some of these companies. Like there's a certain amount of protectionism that comes in. Certainly some of the big ones, European side, some of the patent applications have been completely absurd, trying to patent psilocybin, sitting on a couch, listening to music, that kind of stuff. And there's obviously, like, they're the first people that invented listening to Pink Floyd and taking some shrooms or something. And there's obviously a business angle there. Like, they want to be the gatekeepers. There are monopolistic gatekeepers that want a certain framework where they get to demarcate what is valid use and what is invalid use, and they get to stigmatize what they want to stigmatize, and they get to pull down the profits. But I don't think they're going to win. It's very difficult to win. It's proven.
That sounds like cannabis here in the U.S. when a lot of people were trying to get it approved through the politicians, and the politicians said, like, they were saying no, but really in the background they were just building up their own way. Like, all right, if we're going to make this legal, we're going to do it my way to make a bunch of money off of it. And it sounds like that's what they were pretty much doing over there in Europe, was like, all right, we're going to do it, but all of us here at the top that can make it happen for you, we're going to try to make money off of that back before we can let it get to you. That's such bullshit.
Yeah, it happened in Canada for cannabis as well. You had police chiefs that were vehemently against cannabis, all of a sudden had cannabis companies post-legalization. You had some of the biggest quote-unquote entrepreneurs in cannabis in Canada were Liberal Party insiders that had the inside, as is always the case. Completely nepotistic political insiders making a lot of money from these legal changes. That's like Nancy Pelosi insider stock trading type stuff. They know legalization's coming down. How do we prepare the ground with companies that we own or take part in or whatever it is? Yeah, no, it's completely disgusting. It's completely disgusting because people have used these substances for thousands of years. A lot of this stuff just isn't patentable, which is why there is an obsession with second and third generation kind of psychedelics, because they need to do something that's novel and useful. There's all sorts of ways they try and do that. They deuterize them, they change a molecule to make it slightly different and then try and patent that. So there's a whole bunch of shenanigans. But
can you patent a strain of something? Like you get a strain of mushroom, B plus penis envy, you create your own, you get one that's stronger than the other. Are you able to patent that?
I don't think so. I think the things that they're kind of, now quicker acting substances, shorter acting substances. There's a whole bunch of stuff, like a psychedelic without the trip. So it's just the kind of the biochemical changes instead of the kind of experiential consciousness changes, whether or not that will work. There's been people talking about off switches and patenting. You're having a bad trip, take this and it can turn it off. And it's not like I'm totally against IP or patents if it genuinely is novel and useful, and there's a lot of R&D and investment going into it. But the facts are, most of these companies to start with were just trying to carpet bomb and do patent things that were already very much in the public domain. Yeah,
it's like when Trump tried to patent the money bag many years ago. Sir, no.
Yeah.
And you see it with like insulin. There's a lot of good use cases where it's like, hey, if there's something like generic insulin is available for diabetics, but there's a legit use case where private insulin is much more effective, and that there's a role for insurance companies to play, but it just doesn't sound like it. There's, what I'm reflecting back is like, there's this group of fundamentalists where it's like, hey, you have to go through the stomach hurt, right? You have to go through the journey because that's what the psychedelic journey is all about, right? So that you can get on the other side of things and it be the journey, versus with other people, hey, they could be coming off the back of chemo and they literally can't hold it down. And I see there being a real big role to play for big pharma coming in and making something that is more suitable. But yeah, I don't know. Do you see any like stark difference between how Canada is handling this and how America's handling new regulation?
Canada's acting a bit slower. They are going through this. We're going to do palliative care. People that are sick and dying can get a special access. There is a lot of companies doing work, and so there's a lot of kind of research permits being handed out, licenses, etc. But And then, but that's from like a pure legalization standpoint. When the actual truth is, if you want to get any substance in Canada, it's completely easy, and there's close to no chance of you getting in legal trouble. You can buy shrooms, DMT, LSD online. You can get it delivered to your home. Like, it's completely easy. You've got stores on the main high street selling mushrooms openly. Certainly in Vancouver, you've got, you know, you can go in there and get a DMT or whatever you want. So the truth is that it's effectively decriminalized. That doesn't mean that you can be a full legal commercial business. Like, we wouldn't engage in that, but it's practically legalized, practically decriminalized, I would say, in Canada. Whereas in the US, you've got these kind of legal frameworks popping up state by state, much like with Canada, where you're making a lot of progress, lots of kind of official decrim going through. Obviously, you've got counties, Oakland, etc., legalization, or Oregon, Portland, blah, 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 blah. So I would say there's more legal framework kind of being pushed over the line in the US. Canada is, you know, you just don't be a massive dealer and you can use this stuff. And even then, we're probably not going to criminalize it. And then we'll grant exemptions to seriously sick people. And yeah, to your point before, Dylan, like the pushback, like I can understand people not necessarily wanting to rush if you want to get it through a legal framework, because that's the biggest. I don't think we're all of a sudden going to get a crowd of people all of a sudden wanting to take DMT just because it's legalized. If you want to get it through government, you can't scare them. You need to take baby steps and get one thing approved and then do another thing. Politics move slowly, but in my mind, I can understand that cerebrally, but in my mind, these substances don't need to be proven effective medicine for people to have access to them. It's almost besides the point. It's a human right to have cognitive liberty, i.e. to experiment with our own consciousness. And I personally find it offensive to have somebody sitting in a political office telling me what plants I am legally allowed to consume. Like, it's the hubris of politicians thinking they can ban a certain substance that grows out of the ground is ludicrous to me. Ultimately, I think people should have access to them, and that's the only moral position. But from a kind of business realist standpoint, I understand people wanting to tiptoe this to build out the legal framework. But like I said, what I don't think will happen, even if you have a fully legalized tomorrow, you're not going to have soccer mums. Oh shit, DMT's legal. Let's get out there and we're gonna have a hit on this vape. It just doesn't work like that. People have already got access to this stuff for the most part.
Just from a market standpoint, too, to think about that, right? So you've gotten into the business, you've seen a lot of companies. Are there a lot of companies like yours that are trying to break into the market at the same time? I was reading into it. You wish you had gotten into it a little bit earlier. It seems like it's picked up a lot over COVID. A lot of companies had the same idea, a lot of free time. Probably were out in the forest doing mushrooms, and we're like, let's get this out to everybody. You know, what's your thought on that? Are you... Two parts, actually. Is there a lot of companies doing this that are around the world? And how far ahead of the game do you think you are?
Yeah, good question. I wish I'd got into it earlier just because I enjoy it so much. And I think it's been gratifying doing it. But from a business standpoint, I don't really worry about first mover stuff too much because I'm a brand guy and a consumer guy. The brand is the IP and the brand are what consumers build affinity with. And if you're good at brand building, it doesn't really matter who comes after, as long as you have a good product and value proposition that articulates that to a specific bunch of people, that they'll buy the product. Now, as for competition, like, there aren't many companies doing, I would say, like, broadly what Gwella does, but there are kind of companies doing parts of it, and a bunch of them we love. So, like, on the education side, Third Wave, great education, great content. Double Blind magazine, great content, great education. They have some grow kits, things like that. And they're very much speaking the same language, like people should be able to access this stuff, betterment to the well, things like that. And then on the kind of the mojo side, nootropics, mushroom products, things like that. There are obviously a load of mushroom products out there, but just none that are the same mix as ours, that do the same things, that claim to be this kind of microdose mimic. There are lots of like functional mushroom products, which I like too. I don't really like coffee very much, but I like boiling chunks of chaga and making chaga tea. I don't like ruining coffee with mushrooms, if I'm honest. Like coffee, my
bit of a
ancestors
purist.
are Italian. coffee is like a sacred, yeah. Like I just like my mushrooms separately, but
That's such
yeah,
an opposite what you hear. Most people are like, I want to add it to my coffee. And it messes up my morning. You're like, nah, man.
coffee's already
Separate
perfect.
worlds here.
Coffee is already perfect. Yeah, no, but early on we were like, there's a bunch of products out there. We love a lot of these products, but we don't just want to build another coffee and tea. There's enough coffees, teas. So there's Four Sigmatic 10 years ago and Mudwater, and I think all of these brands are dope. But we knew we wanted to build something that was a bit different, that had a very specific effect, that had short-term impact as well as these compounding long-term benefits, and that was in more of a... We didn't want people to mix things, although I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. We just wanted it to be like a grab-and-go product. So we thought about like a canned beverage, a drink. I still think about that, some microdose beverage or something like that, much like a cannabis beverage. But ultimately we landed on gummies because people are used to gummies. They're big in a supplement world. People are used to them from cannabis, and we're big consumers of them. And it's a great way to mask what is essentially a lot of fairly bitter ingredients. Ginseng, and it's quite bitter. Mushrooms can be quite bitter. There's a whole bunch of things that can act in that way, and so masking it within a gummy that was convenient on the go and novel. There wasn't really, at the time, there wasn't like a bunch of mushroom gummies, so we thought it would be quite interesting to put it in that.
Just curious too, a lot of people go the powder drink route. Why not that? You went the
we
gummy
thought about
route
that
instead of
too.
the powder
Yeah,
drink?
we thought about. I love like brands like Element. I drink their
Yeah.
electrolytes. It's cool. Great margins on those products. And we just decided we wanted something that was like, it's there, you just eat it. There was no preparation or anything. Not that I think pouring powder into a drink is hugely difficult, but we really wanted it to be just easy on the go. The other things we thought about are like chewing gum or a mint that you can just suck on, like a candy type thing, or like I said, a sparkling water type beverage, something like that. I think could be quite interesting, or a shot, like a dream water style shot.
So do you see
5 hour
yourself?
energy.
Do you guys see
5 hour
yourself taking this product and wanting to look at other forms you could potentially introduce that in and look for market fit there? Or do you see yourself working backwards from other states that somebody might want to be in and looking to develop a product to fit?
That's really where our head's at right now. Is like, we tested the libido gummy, it worked really well, and so we'll probably integrate that as a kind of permanent fixture, and then we'll just have a look at other use cases. Really, Mojo's through line is we work with mushrooms heavily. We like to go into nature and find different botanicals and treat, almost like thinking about nature as this kind of pharmaceutical kind of toolkit, natural drugs. What are interesting pairings? How can we select different ingredients that work synergistically and stack them together? And you can find uppers, you can find downers, things that can help for sleep, things that can help for libido. Just exploring these interesting ingredients. Like, back to the just fascinated with the plants thing when I was younger on Erowid. There's a bunch out there that people barely use or barely know about. Obviously, there's things like kratom that people use, like a mild opioid, great for pain relief, relaxing effect. Kava, one that I really like, Blue Lotus, which is a water lily that the Egyptians used, and they used to gather it up, put it in a bottle of wine, let it ferment, and then drink it after a month and get pretty gnarly on that stuff. And on a small dose, it's a bit of a kind of sleep agent. You get lucid dreams from it, but on a bigger, it's like a mild, in my experience, has been like a very mild MDMA type buzz. You get this kind of very nice, warm, empathic kind of feeling on it. And that's not illegal. It's not legal for consumption. I think it's one of those weird FDA things. You can sell it as a room odorizer or something like that. But the point is, like, there's tons of these cool plants that do interesting things that we can tap into. And especially at a time when people are trying to be a bit more healthy, the main drug that we all take is alcohol. I'm a huge fan of alcohol. I love the history. I love I'm an equal opportunity alcohol drink. I love beer, whiskey, whatever it is. But I do know that it's not very good for you. And that's one thing that I know if I could reduce and constantly try and reduce, like, I'm going to feel better. But there are different substances out there that can give you a mild buzz and can create similar feelings without that toxic that alcohol has. Again, saying that, the fact that I like drinking, but we all know, if we're honest with ourselves, that alcohol probably isn't the best for our health. And most people in the West are on this kind of coffee to alcohol pipeline throughout the day, and there are other substances out there that could be I think of myself at 6 a.m. I have a double espresso, and then by 5 I'm wanting some wine with dinner or whatever it is. And
beautiful cycle.
It really is. It really is. I'm not a big cannabis smoker anymore. If I was, that may be like a good alternative, but cannabis stopped mixing with me really well. And so like these other different herbs and stuff, like they're cool. Dropping a little bit of Blue Lotus at 7 o'clock at night and just going out, that's nice. And there's no hang-up.
You've talked a lot about that you and your friends experimented a lot with these different things, get the products to work. Even back in the day, you and your buddies were like, let's try this thing. Let's find this thing. We did this. Colton, I wanted to bring this up because you've talked about, Colton, that there's been like the person that you were researching before, they had a procedure when they were testing all these things. The gentleman that came up with the MA, I guess. I don't know if you want to talk to that. You have a better way of describing what he did, and then maybe bring that up of did Peter and his group kind of have a similar process?
Yeah, that doctor's name's escaping me. Peter, I don't know if you're familiar with the author behind Fecal, A Chemical Love Story.
Oh, Shulgin.
Yeah, so I think what Dylan's scratching at is the experimental procedure protocol that they used to go through when he would be experimenting with new substances with his buddies. So the 15 of them in his inner circle that would essentially follow like a system or a pragmatic protocol of sorts with their setting and their communication. So if someone's having some kind of serious thought or needs attention or an intervention of sorts, they would say, my hand is raised, and they raise their hand, and whatever follows that statement is, oh, holy shit, the house might actually be on fire kind of thing. So when you were with your friends in the forest or wherever, did you have any ground rules, or did you guys have any kind of like systems that you had developed? Because it sounds like these are spaces that you've experimented with different plants and substances and things like that.
Yeah, I wish I could say that we did, but yeah, I think that book is Shulgin, Alexander, and Anne. Shulgin invented a whole bunch of chemicals, 2CB, MDMA. It makes sense that he's got this process. The guy's a G in the space, built these things, really thought about them from a kind of therapeutic lens as well as consciousness lens, and obviously put his scientific mind into how he approached them. We were just completely reckless, I would say.
As we all
are. We bought these huge doses of mushrooms and just took them, and zero idea on what they could do. And the point about being wonderful and terrifying, it's like I had some terrible trips for sure, but now I'm super careful about how I approach these substances, and I plan things down to a T. Back then it was try it. Obviously as I got older, I'd do research on Erowid, things like that, but I'd read dosage reports, but even then it was just like, I remember taking Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds, which is LSA, and taking these things and remembering that it was like, don't take any more than this. And then but the problem was, like, there's an up when you're taking LSA, and it's cocaine-y type up. And as we're eating them, we're like, oh shit, this is the best thing ever in that like early peak phase. And so keep like eating them, not really realizing that the early come up phase, not realizing there's like a hell of a peak coming 2 hours down the road. And like I said, now when I'm going to do, I don't know, I'm going to do MDMA or something like that with my friends. I'm like, okay, what are the pre-supplements? What are the post-supplements? Have we got the water? What's going to be the setting? How do I mentally prepare myself going into this? All of that stuff I genuinely give a lot of thought to, and the resulting downside is much rarer. Like, obviously MDMA is maybe a bit more controllable, but I think even with the psilocybin or anything like that kind of pre-work, that having a process, setting, it really does help to minimize uncomfort, discomfort, and any panic. You can't completely avoid it, but it's so important. And that's, again, one of the things that I want with Guella is like arm people with as much information as possible. MDMA is an incredible substance. It really has very little. There's debate around its neurotoxicity on a higher doses and repeated usage, but For the most part, it's a very clean chemical that has very little downside. If you take it in the day, not raving and dancing and doing all of that stuff, combining it with alcohol and whatever else, chances of you getting quote-unquote Blue Monday is close to zero, studies have shown. It's really a super powerful chemical, and growing up in the UK, it was in the 90s, there's rave scene and all of that type of stuff. It was the biggest, the ecstasy pills, not MDMA, that came later, but same difference. It was very popular, but demonized in the press, and there were a few high-profile deaths, young people that, you know, basically either drank too much water or didn't drink enough water, drowned their brain, and most of these deaths were probably quite avoidable with the right harm reduction and education. It wasn't necessarily there. I'm sure people got bad pills and things like that, but again, that's a symptom of black market, people not being able to get quality stuff. So if people actually had access to high quality, pure MDMA in a safe environment, armed with the right information, there would be a lot less harm caused to people that will inevitably want to do this stuff. And I was saying to somebody the other day, like, even forget about the harm to us or whatever, the harm that political institutions are doing to themselves for, you know, putting out what is essentially kind of propaganda. In the 90s, it was ecstasy's the demon drug, all of this kind of stuff, and newspapers were talking about this horror show. And I remember a pop star, Brian Harvey, that was in this kind of very average boy band called E17. He wasn't very bright, bless him, but he was once on TV, and they asked him about his drug taking, if he tried ecstasy, and he was just completely honest about it. It was like, yeah, man, it's fun. And he was in the 90s version of cancelled. Oh my God, this can't be real. This guy's doing drug use. Anybody that's taken MDMA knows that's 100%. It can be fun. Yeah. It can be very nice. It can create these incredible feelings of empathy and warmth and love. And they're creating this generation of people that just think they're full of shit. If they're lying about this, what else are they lying about? Probably a lot.
It's funny, y'all were in the UK in the 90s, like, it was all MDMA is great, everything over there. And then over here, it's like meth and crack. We got to bring that one down. We should probably put a stop to that one.
Yeah.
For sure. So comparison is hilarious.
Maybe that's a Florida thing.
For sure.
Oh, man.
Yeah, well, look, even meth and crack, if I was to pick drugs that were like spiritually enlightening, they would probably be at the low end of my list.
Definitely down at the totem pole, under the ground.
Yeah. But even there, I like what people like Dr. Carl Hart, says about these substances. Like, even the much maligned kind of cocaine, you know, of course people can get addicted to these substances, and it's probably not what we want to be sold in a convenience store, in a commercial setting. But do we want to put people in jail for it? Definitely not. Do we want to provide education, things like that? I think so. And my experience, just broadly with drugs, has been people can handle all of these substances, have a good time, use them in some way. Maybe they have like bad hangovers or whatever, but I don't know personally anybody that's got addicted, and maybe that's because I haven't got people that have got serious trauma in their life in my group of friends and have had that kind of bad luck and past. But generally speaking, I agree with Carl Hart that, you know, my experience and my reflection has been even stuff like cocaine. People casually use it occasionally, have a good time, put it away, get on with their life. It's the people that maybe don't have a support network, or maybe have had some trauma, or they don't have a life to get back to, that get sucked into this hole of addiction. And those people obviously want empathy and help and structures around there. But generally speaking, I'm not convinced that like any drug should be put on that demonization list. It's certainly not been my experience. And granted, I haven't tried everything, but that's generally how I feel about all drugs. It's probably better if we don't demonize people. It's probably better if we don't stigmatize them. Most people can handle probably most things. They're adults. They can get on with their own lives and make these decisions. And for people that struggle, we should be providing support and
Totally agree.
Yeah, and
in short, let's put the cocaine back in Coca-Cola.
You're here.
I think we should have opened up with that statement, but now that it's coming full circle at the end, I can appreciate a hard close. Peter, as we're landing the plane here,
Yeah, coming next year. Cocaine gummy.
one final question for you. It's something we love to ask all our guests. One of our Billboard questions is, hey, what's one question or one thing that you wished more people asked you or gave you the opportunity to speak about?
Oof. You asked me about the kind of one-dimensional person. That's been something I've thought about for a while, and I read a book. It was called The One-Dimensional Man, and it was by more of a kind of critical theorist, Marxist, Frankfurt School guy. I was super into that in my teenage years. It's very anti-consumerist type stuff and what industrial society does to us and our soul and all that type of stuff. But it always stuck with me, that idea of the one-dimensional man and the kind of flattening of imagination. And I think embracing multiple facets of your personhood is really healthy from a kind of just a human being perspective, but also from a business and economic standpoint. I think the idea of things like this brand, something I really hate, like this idea that you want to funnel your personality and your humanity into an easily packageable, consumable format is actually quite damaging to you, and it makes you a boring person. And boring people don't do well in business, I think, whether it's sales or whatever it is. One of the things that I think has helped me is this kind of multi-layered interest in different things and experience with different things. I've played golf or tennis, I've touched drugs, I'm interested in a variety of different things, and it allows me to pull on different things in a creative way, but also relate to people, anybody really, and talk to people and find something of interest. And I can't tell you how useful that's been from let's say a sales perspective. A big part of my career has been building partnerships and collaborations and that kind of stuff, and being able to walk into an office and bond with somebody really fast because I know a little bit about the thing that they know a lot about is super helpful. And you only do that by this kind of general kind of interest in a broad amount of things. I think that I can't remember the guy who said it, but he said specialization is for the ants. Like, I really think the human experience should involve multiple things. You should be able to drive a car, tie a knot, cook some food, whatever it is, go fishing, roll a joint, whatever. Like, there should be lots of different things that you should be able to do. And this idea of funneling yourself for an efficient kind of economic return is ultimately a bad for you as a business person, but a bad idea for you as a human. If you stare into that personal brand void, that will stare back at you. If you project a one-dimensional message, you will get that back and you'll become a one-dimensional person.
Mic drop. All right, Dylan, take them away. Oh, Peter, where can people find you and all that goodness?
Yeah, man. So you can find Gwella at gwellamushrooms.com. You can find Mojo at mojo.shop. If you want to try the gummies, there's a code WELCOME20, I believe. And then you can find me personally on probably Twitter is the best place. You can just search for Peter Reitano. My handle is Digidharma. So any of those.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter, for coming on. I'm definitely going to get me some of those gummies for sure. That's going to end up right here. If you love this episode, everyone, make sure to follow us, like the episode, make sure to follow Peter, make sure to follow Gwella, share with your friends, share with your loved ones, share with your friends, neighbor down the road, guy you met last week, whatever. Just get it out there. Until next time, everyone. Peace.
Peace.